Could some of the world's most powerful countries collapse by 2030? While it may sound impossible, recent official warnings, economic trends, and internal instability paint a deeply troubling picture. According to the International Monetary Fund's April 2025 report, several nations that once shaped global politics are now showing signs of severe economic distress, rising authoritarianism, environmental collapse, or even civil unrest. And these aren't just small or poor countries. We're talking about global giants whose fall could trigger a domino effect worldwide. For millions of ordinary people, this could mean rising fuel prices, migration waves, currency collapse, and even war. In this video, we'll take you on a well-researched, fact-based journey through 10 powerful countries that are at real risk of collapse by 2030. Using verified data from government sources, interviews with world leaders, and statements from institutions like the UN, World Bank, and Reuters, we'll unpack what's really going on behind the scenes. Stay till the end, because country number 3 might be the most shocking, and its downfall could impact your life more than you think. Number 1. South Africa. Once hailed as Africa's most promising economy, South Africa now stands at a dangerous crossroads. According to Al Jazeera, May 2025, the nation faces a precipitous economic and political collapse by 2030 if urgent reforms are not enacted. Despite the hopes raised after the end of apartheid, economic growth has remained sluggish for decades. As Reuters reported in April 2025, South Africa still holds one of the highest unemployment rates in the world, officially at 32% and over 42% under broader definitions. President Cyril Ramaphosa admitted in a March 2025 speech that the economy had barely grown in 15 years and acknowledged that poverty and inequality remain extremely high. These crises are further compounded by widespread corruption, energy shortages, and political instability. In 2024, the ruling ANC lost its parliamentary majority for the first time since 1994, reflecting growing public frustration. According to a joint Bloomberg-Al Jazeera analysis, February 2025, South Africa is already on trajectory to rank among potential failed states by the end of this decade, unless dramatic structural change occurs. Number 2. Pakistan. Pakistan's economic foundations are rapidly eroding, leaving even its nuclear status unable to shield it from collapse. As per Reuters, May 2024, public debt has soared past 70% of GDP, while interest payments alone now consume nearly half of government revenue. The IMF, in its 2024 assessment, warned that downside risks remain exceptionally high, citing inflation spikes, briefly reaching 38%, and persistent currency volatility. The country narrowly avoided default in mid-2023 with a last-minute $3 billion IMF bailout, but as of early 2025, Islamabad is once again in urgent talks for a new rescue deal. The political environment adds further instability. Fragile coalition governments, military overreach, and simmering extremism undermine governance. The IMF also highlighted that political uncertainty remains significant. Analysts fear that even a moderate external shock, such as rising oil prices or reduced remittances, could trigger mass unrest. With soaring poverty, declining investor confidence, and little fiscal space, Pakistan faces a very real possibility of systemic collapse before 2030 without deep structural reforms and sustainable leadership. Number 3. Turkey. Turkey's economic turbulence has intensified into a crisis that experts fear could spiral by 2030. After years of unorthodox monetary policy, inflation peaked above 75% in 2023, and the lira lost over 80% of its value within 5 years. Reuters, 2023. Though President Erdogan later reversed course, implementing rate hikes to stabilize the economy, the recovery remains fragile and uneven. In early 2025, the arrest of Istanbul's mayor triggered the largest anti-government protests in a decade, as reported by Reuters, sending markets into a freefall and pushing the lira to yet another record low. Turkish equities suffered their worst week since 2008, with businesses scrambling to contain the fallout. Foreign reserves are dangerously low, public debt has risen above 40% of GDP, and investor confidence remains shaky. Analysts warn that Erdogan's model, propping up political stability through economic growth, is unsustainable in the face of growing unrest, external military pressures, and refugee tensions. Without deeper structural reforms and political restraint, Turkey risks cascading into severe economic and political collapse by the end of the decade. Number 4. Russia. Russia's economy is under increasing stress, with the appearance of wartime strength masking deeper vulnerabilities. As of early 2025, GDP growth slowed sharply, from 3% in January to just 0.8% in February, according to Reuters. Outside the defense sector, industrial output is stagnating, labor shortages are rising, and critical sectors face ongoing supply disruptions. Carnegie Endowment 2025. Inflation remains high, hovering around 10%, while Western sanctions and falling oil prices strain the national budget. In May 2025, Finance Minister Anton Siluanov warned of an economic hypothermia due to shrinking energy revenues, the backbone of the state's war-fueled spending. Though the Kremlin continues to suppress dissent, rising casualties in Ukraine and growing social fatigue may test internal stability. Economists within Russia reportedly admit that growth will likely sputter, and any significant shock, such as a steep oil price crash or military defeat, could trigger both economic collapse and political upheaval. With sanctions biting, budgets tightening, and leadership aging, Russia's wartime resilience may not last through 2030 without major structural change. Number 5. China. China, the world's second-largest economy, still posts growth figures. But beneath the surface, severe structural issues are building. In 2025, Fitch Ratings downgraded China's sovereign credit rating to A, citing a rapidly rising public debt expected to surpass 70% of GDP. Reuters 2025. Local governments are reportedly carrying over $8 trillion in shadow debt, much of it tied to a collapsing property sector, where investment dropped 10.6% in 2024, and home prices have plunged roughly 30% from their peak. Meanwhile, China's population shrank by 2.08 million in 2024, marking its first decline since 1961, with the birth rate at a historic low. Demographic decline is paired with economic strains. Youth unemployment hit record highs in 2023, household incomes remain stagnant, and consumer confidence is weak. While President Xi's administration retains firm political control, managing unrest in a massive, slowing economy is a growing challenge. Experts warn that without meaningful reforms, China faces a perfect storm of debt overload, demographic drag, and collapsing asset values. Although stimulus efforts are planned, analysts caution that failure to address these deep-rooted issues could push China toward a much sharper slowdown before 2030. Number 6. Iran. Iran's theocratic regime is facing mounting internal pressure as economic hardships deepen under the weight of prolonged sanctions. By late 2024, the Iranian rial collapsed to an all-time low of around 750,000 per US dollar, losing over 90% of its value since 2018. Reuters 2024. Official inflation hovers near 35%, while basic goods become increasingly unaffordable. Public frustration is growing. Over 1 million Iranians joined mass protests after a death in custody in 2022, and demonstrations over jobs and inflation continue to erupt. A senior Iranian cleric recently admitted the economic crisis is more challenging than during the Iran-Iraq War. Tehran is desperately seeking relief through potential nuclear negotiations to lift sanctions and restore stability. But beyond sanctions, the country faces severe water shortages and escalating regional tensions that further strain the system. With economic collapse brewing and widespread discontent simmering, Iran's leadership is increasingly vulnerable. Analysts warn that if the regime cannot deliver meaningful recovery, the combination of financial decline and social unrest could challenge its survival well before 2030. Number 7. United States. Despite its global dominance, the United States faces growing internal vulnerabilities that analysts say could challenge its long-term stability. Public debt surged to 97% of GDP in 2023, with Moody's warning in September 2024 that America's fiscal strength will materially weaken if deficits remain above 7% annually. Reuters, 2024. Projections show debt could reach 130% of GDP by 2034, raising concerns about long-term fiscal sustainability. Credit downgrades and warnings from major agencies reflect growing anxiety over the government's ability to rein in spending. Equally alarming is the social divide. Since January 2021, the U.S. has witnessed its worst surge in political violence since the 1970s, including the Capitol riot and escalating attacks by partisan groups. Reuters, 2024. Trust in institutions has eroded, and the rise of armed militias signals deepening fractures in American society. While the U.S. retains strong institutions and a resilient economy, the intersection of unsustainable debt, political gridlock, and social unrest presents a serious risk. By 2030, analysts warn, even this superpower could face a crisis if these destabilizing trends remain unaddressed. Number 8. United Kingdom. The United Kingdom faces mounting economic and political strain in the post-Brexit era. GDP growth has been sluggish, with 2024 figures showing near stagnation and IMF forecasts projecting only 1.2 to 1.4% annual growth going forward. Reuters, 2024. The national debt has breached 100% of GDP, and the 2024/25 fiscal deficit hit £152 billion, around 5.3% of GDP. With the Bank of England maintaining high interest rates to combat inflation, economic momentum remains constrained. Despite modest resilience, global financial instability and market volatility pose significant risks to Britain's fragile recovery. Internally, the political landscape is just as precarious. Separatist movements in Scotland and Northern Ireland are gaining ground, while underfunded public services have triggered widespread discontent. Reuters reports the IMF now considers the UK's fiscal outlook vulnerable to global shocks. Combined with an aging population and years of underwhelming growth, Britain's stability is being quietly eroded. By 2030, experts caution that external disruptions, like energy crises or trade conflicts, could deepen domestic fractures, potentially threatening the unity and governance of the UK itself. Number 9. Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia, long viewed as financially unshakable, now finds its stability deeply tied to volatile oil markets. In 2025, oil prices dropped to a 4-year low, threatening to erase tens of billions in government revenue. Critical, given that over 60% of the kingdom's budget is still funded by oil. Reuters, 2025. Aramco, the state oil giant, slashed dividends by a third, while public debt surged 16% to $324 billion in 2024. With deficits rising, the government is expected to borrow more, especially to fund Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman's ambitious Vision 2030 diversification plan, which now risks underfunding. While officials have signaled tolerance for budget deficits of 4 to 5% of GDP to build non-oil sectors, experts warn the kingdom remains overly dependent on hydrocarbon revenue. If global oil demand slows further, due to the green energy transition or a prolonged global recession, Saudi Arabia could face a serious fiscal crunch. Analysts caution that without swift and sustainable reforms, Riyadh's oil reliance could trigger a major financial crisis by 2030, threatening both its economic vision and political stability. Number 10. Egypt. Egypt's ambitious development projects mask deep economic and environmental vulnerabilities. Public debt hovers near 90% of GDP, inflation soared to 38% in 2023, and persistent foreign exchange shortages forced a large IMF bailout in 2022. Despite some growth, much of the population remains in poverty, while the government has had to relax budget surplus targets to maintain fiscal stability. Reuters, 2023 to 2024. The economic strain is compounded by an existential threat. A severe water crisis fueled by climate change and upstream dam construction, which has drastically reduced Nile water supplies, critical for millions of farmers. UN analysts warn that this growing scarcity risks triggering social instability and even conflict. Egypt's leadership faces the daunting challenge of balancing IMF-driven economic reforms with urgent regional diplomacy to secure water resources. Without swift, effective action, the combination of economic pressure, population growth, and dwindling freshwater could push Egypt toward serious turmoil before 2030. In summary, these 10 countries each face unique but daunting challenges, from economic stagnation and soaring debt to political unrest and environmental crises. Whether it's South Africa's rising inequality, China's demographic decline, or Egypt's water scarcity, the path ahead is uncertain and fraught with risk. While some governments attempt reforms or diversification, underlying structural problems remain deeply rooted. Understanding these global vulnerabilities helps us appreciate the complexity of today's geopolitical and economic landscape, and why the world in 2030 could look very different from today. If you found this analysis insightful, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe for more in-depth explorations of global issues and travel insights. Share your thoughts in the comments. What country's situation surprised you the most? And if you want to stay updated on future developments shaping our world, ring the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.